You know, a lot of people don't realize that most writers do spend more time doing research than they do actual writing. And this is especially true if you're working on history or something like that, where the facts have to be both verified and included. I have a friend who's a writer, fellow writer, down at south of Lubbock. He lives in that part down there, and he decided to write a book about the early settlers of the upper Brazos area, which is in there. And he was over in Snyder, Texas, in the Historical Society's storerooms going through photos. And he found this box from a man who had lived in Crowell, Texas, which is some 100 miles east. And he was going through that and came across 5 photos of wrecked airplane. And it had nothing to do with what he was searching for, but it was so interesting that he just scanned them in his computer and then sent them to me because he knew that I was involved in aviation. And I took one look at them and I thought, Jennies, World War I Jennies. But a little bit further looking at them, I realized that it was 5 different airplanes, all of them wrecked. So I wrote him back and I said, where in the world did these come from? And he told me, and he contacted the lady that ran the library there and said, would you look further into this? And the only date on them, the only thing on them was a date of 1917. So she started looking and had Crowell newspaper articles and found one that told about 4 airplanes being wrecked in the town of Crowell in a period of 2 days. That was very unusual, so I started researching further from that, and what I found was these airplanes had military markings on them. They weren't civilian, and some of them had Canadian markings and some American. So that led me to do some research on my own, and I found Call Field, C-A-L-L, never heard of it. And it has a very interesting past. But here's a story about those 4 airplanes that were crashed in a 2-day period in Crowell, Texas, a little town of about 500 people. The pictures told the story of what happened. It was a comedy of errors. The first one is the airplane that landed there first. Picked the crowd around it, all looking at it. It was something new in town. But then it took off, failed to clear a building, clipped the roof, and tumbled into a pig pen next to a barn. The next picture is the next morning. They flew a couple of mechanics down there to help disassemble it to go on a flat car to be shipped back to the base. And when it landed, it ran in through a fence and tore up the prop. So it was now grounded. The next picture was a pilot and a mechanic who flew down with a prop for the second one, and they ran into a ditch and put it up on its nose, which broke the prop on it. Then the final airplane they sent down there with another prop, when it started to take off, it did a takeoff ground loop, which is probably the most vicious thing that you can have happen in an airplane like that, with a tail skid on it. What it does, it starts turning, and if you don't have enough rudder to hold it straight, the turn accelerates And if you'll look at all those airplanes, you'll see a bow under each wing. That's supposed to hold them up off the ground when they ground looped them. So it was a fairly common thing. Except this one was on takeoff and it just went completely wild, stuck the nose in the ground, went over on its back. And they were disassembling it to load it on freight cars to go back. In trying to find where those airplanes came from, I did some research on early training bases and found a place called Call, C-A-L-L, Call Field in Wichita Falls, which is about 60 miles away from where the accidents happened. They moved the training squadron from Canada down there in late 1916 and started training pilots in the south, in Texas, where the weather was a lot better for flying than it was in Canada. This is the instructor cadre for the first class, and kind of a motley looking crew. And then the next picture is of the first class of 28 cadets. This picture is of the 16 original standard J1 trainers that they brought down from Canada. That's the reason that they had Canadian markings on them. And shortly after that, they started getting in Curtiss J4s, JN4s, which are totally different airplanes, or at least different companies, even though they look similar to one another. The easy way to tell them apart is look at the cabane strut on top of the top wing. The Jennies, the cabane posts really, were sticking straight up, where the cabane strut was an inverted V on top of the wing on the standards. They both happen to have the letter J because in those days the manufacturers put them out by letters, like A was their first one, B second, and so on. And they just happen to both have J. But the N after the one made by Curtiss was military for training. And since it was a JN4, it became a Jenny. These two aerial photos, the first one is of Call Field when it was about half done, and the other one was when it was completed with all the hangars and buildings and everything. And it operated for only about 3 years until it closed in 1924. They put it up for auction. They sold the buildings off to be moved or torn down for the lumber. And by 1928 it was completely gone. And this is the cover for the book that Norman Brown, who found the photos, is going to write on their early training of pilots in Texas. If you like these videos, subscribe to my videos and leave a like or dislike, whichever suits you, and tell your friends about them. Thanks for watching.